Hi everybody, I'm Kirstin. I'm going to do another live musing about a quote, and I just realized that I forgot to look up who this person is. So anyway, Cheryl Richardson. If you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. So I might look up who Cheryl Richardson is as I speak, or maybe somebody can look it up for me and post it in the comments. I like her quote for sure. One of the things that I talk a lot about is preference in conflict style, and there are 5 styles of conflict solving that that I teach about: compete, avoid, accommodate, collaborate, and compromise. And what Cheryl is talking about here when she talks about when you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. She's talking about avoid, of course, and often when you're avoiding to keep the peace, you're avoiding because you are worried that addressing something and having that difficult conversation is going to impact a relationship in a negative way, and so you're trying to keep the peace, right? And because relationships are important, because you're worried that that conflict is going to have a negative impact on the relationship going forward. And this war that you start inside yourself that she's talking about is that idea that when you avoid conflict, when you don't address something that causes you concern or upset or discomfort in some way, you're not getting your needs met. Those feelings, those emotions, those, whether they're strong or small emotions, they are clues to unmet needs. And when we don't meet those needs, they're not going to just go away, right? They have to be met in some way. And sometimes they don't have to be met by the other person. And it's perfectly okay to avoid that conflict and to find a different way to meet that need. One of the things I teach when I teach about these 5 styles is that all of them have their place and time, right? So all of them are appropriate in certain circumstances. And so choosing which style to use in the moment is a bit tricky. And it's the first question often that we need to ask is, what style of conflict solving is most appropriate for me to use in this situation? So yeah, sometimes it's avoid. But in those times where you're trying to avoid conflict to keep the peace, as Cheryl is talking about here, that war that you start inside yourself is when you haven't found other ways to meet the needs, or when those needs do need to be met by the person or people or organization or whatever that you're avoiding the conflict with. Because what happens over time is that the needs build up, the resentment builds up. That war that gets started within yourself is that those maybe feelings of, that person's not, they don't care about my needs. They are, they're only in it for themselves. They're a bad person. That's that snowballing effect that I talked about over the last couple of times that I did a live video. We start to villainize people, and so the war then comes outside of ourselves and starts moving into, say, the workplace, for instance, if that's where this conflict is happening, or whatever the relationship is that we have the conflict in. So the war that gets started in ourselves does move outside eventually, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe the relationship just ends and the other person doesn't even know why. I often tell this story in my classes. I don't know if it's a story, that's a strong word for it. I talk about how my husband's an introvert, I'm an extrovert. He's a feeler, I'm a thinker. So these are Myers-Briggs terms, Myers-Briggs dichotomies. And so extroverts, we think out loud, which is why I think I'm enjoying these musings so much. Introverts process internally before they put it out to the world. And so there can often be conflict that starts there, right? Where as an extrovert, I might pose a question to my husband back in the day before I knew about this stuff, and he would take some time to consider it, and I'd be like, hello, are you listening to me? And of course he was listening to me. He was reflecting, he was thinking about how he was going to respond. And so that was a really good learning for me. The other thing with my husband being a feeler and a thinker, he tends to accommodate. So I might give a suggestion or a solution about a whatever we need to make a decision on or problem solve. And as an extrovert, I'm thinking out loud. So the first idea out of my mouth isn't usually the one that I would land on. I'm still processing. But because he's an introvert and would think about it for a while and then give me his final sort of thought or where he landed, he would hear my first thought, think that would be my final thought, and because he's also a feeler, would then accommodate and say, okay, we'll do that. And so so that often didn't work. So I'm kind of rambling now a little bit. I'm a little bit off poor Cheryl's quote here. If you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. So I guess, just back to that point of, that I've made a few times, and that is that when you do what my husband often did back in the day, where he would accommodate because relationship was really important to him, there could come a time when someone like him might just say, you know what, you never accommodate my needs. When are my needs going to be important? And it wouldn't be unusual for someone like Kevin to then just sever the relationship, and someone like me to not even know why that happened, and maybe not even have a clue about it, right? Because someone like me, someone maybe who's a thinker, might not even know that I'm being accommodated. So learning this stuff was really instrumental for me, instrumental in my in that relationship, and in all other relationships that I have, whether workplace or personal. And because what it allowed me to do is allow me to recognize that I was being accommodated, or that maybe that someone is avoiding the conflict, and then I can ask for some engagement around that, and maybe make it easier for the person that I'm interacting with to share, what's happening, so that they don't have that thing that Cheryl talks about, that war inside themselves. Because when you have the skills to help people bring the war out, maybe when it's not a war, maybe when it's like a little baby skirmish, then you're more likely to be able to resolve that in a place where it doesn't escalate to the villainization point. So Cheryl Richardson, I still don't know who you are, but I like your quote. If you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. And I just would add to it, I think, and that is, it won't stay inside yourself forever. There will come a time when it will bubble out into the world, either in an action where you end a relationship, or in a blow up, or a big conflict that maybe you were trying to avoid in the first place. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And again, I hope I'm not showing myself to be very ignorant in not knowing who poor Cheryl Richardson is. Thanks.